The candles in Blackthorn Cathedral burned tall and gold, throwing soft light over 1,000 silent faces. Ilara Voss stood at the altar in a gown so heavy it felt like armor, though it was meant to look like a dream. Beside her stood King Draven Ashmore, ruler of the Northern Realms, a man whose name alone could quiet a battlefield. To the guests watching, this wedding was the end of a long war and the beginning of peace. To Ilara, it was the last door closing on her freedom. Her father's kingdom was dying. Years of drought and border raids had left it weak, and Draven's army stood ready at the edges of their land. When his offer came, marriage instead of war, her father had accepted before Ilara could speak a single word against it. She had agreed to walk down that aisle because she loved her people more than she feared her future, but agreeing to save a kingdom was not the same as agreeing to lose herself. What none of them knew, not her father, not the priest, not even Draven, was the secret Ilara had hidden since she was 12 years old. She was a shifter. A wolf lived beneath her skin, sealed away by an enchanted collar she had worn every day of her adult life, hidden beneath ribbons and lace, so no one would ever look twice. Shifters born into royal bloodlines were forbidden by old law from ruling, and if anyone had discovered what she was, her father's throne would have been stripped from their family entirely. So she had learned to smile, to curtsy, to stay silent, and to bury the wildest part of herself so deep that some nights she forgot it was there at all. Tonight, it clawed to the surface. The priest began the vows. In the Northern Realms, a royal wedding was not just a promise between two people. It was a binding, sealed by law and by magic, meant to tie the bride to her husband the moment the final bell of midnight rang. Once sealed, it could never be undone. Ilara had known this for weeks. She had also spent those same weeks planning her escape, hiding a small vial of moonflower extract inside the silk folds of her bouquet, a mild poison strong enough to daze a grown man for several minutes without causing him real harm. The cathedral bells began their long, slow count toward midnight. 11 tolls left, then 10. She glanced at Draven. He was watching her with an intensity that unsettled her, as though he could see straight through the calm mask she wore. He was not smiling. Kings rarely did. But there was something in his eyes that night, something searching, that she chose not to examine too closely. She did not have room in her heart for his complexity. She only had room for her escape. 7 tolls left. Her fingers found the vial hidden in the flowers. She had rehearsed this 100 times in her mind, lying awake in the dark, imagining the exact motion of her wrist, the exact moment to move. When the 8th bell rang, she pressed the small glass tube between her palms, letting the scent spill into the air around the 2 guards flanking the altar steps. Within seconds, their eyes grew heavy, their spears lowering as their knees buckled beneath them. Screams rose from the front pews as nobles realized something was wrong. Ilara did not wait to explain herself. She tore the veil from her hair and ran, her heels forgotten on the marble floor, her wedding gown ripping at the hem as she sprinted down the side corridor toward the old stone stairwell that led beneath the cathedral. Behind her, she heard Draven's voice roar through the chaos, a sound so full of fury and disbelief that it seemed to shake the very walls. She did not look back. The catacombs beneath Blackthorn Cathedral were ancient and dark, but Ilara had explored them as a child, back when her mother still lived, and used to tell her stories about hidden passages and forgotten kings. She knew these tunnels the way she knew her own heartbeat. As she ran through the damp stone corridors, her hands trembled as they reached for the collar at her throat. She had kept it hidden and sealed for so long that unbuckling it now felt like tearing away her own skin. The collar fell to the stone floor with a soft clink. What happened next was not something she could describe in words, not even to herself. A rush of heat spread through her chest, down her arms, into her spine, as though a door long locked had finally been thrown open. Fur rippled across her skin. Her bones shifted with a pain that was somehow also relief. Within seconds, the woman who had walked into that cathedral was gone, and in her place stood a silver-gray wolf, with eyes the same startling green as Ilara's own. She ran through the tunnels, out through an old drainage gate at the edge of the cathedral grounds, and into the darkness of the Whisperwood forest, just as the final bell tolled midnight across the kingdom. Behind her, The cathedral doors burst open, and chaos spilled out into the courtyard, but by then she was already gone, swallowed by the trees, free for the first time in her entire life. Freedom, however, came at a cost she had not fully understood. Draven Ashmore did not simply lose a bride that night. He lost something far more binding, something that could not be undone by law or by will. The moment Alara's wolf had appeared before him at the altar, before she fled, something ancient inside him had recognized her. Alpha bloodlines carried old instincts, tied to fate itself, and in that instant, Draven had felt the unmistakable pull of a true mate bond. It was not something he had chosen. It was something that had chosen him, and now the woman fate had marked for him had vanished into the night, humiliating him in front of every kingdom that had gathered to witness his wedding. His grief and his fury became impossible to separate. He gave his soldiers one command: find her. He told himself it was about pride, about the alliance now broken, about the laughter that would spread through rival courts once word got out that the Alpha King had been left standing at his own altar. But beneath all of that noise was a quieter, more dangerous truth. He was afraid that he had lost the one person fate had chosen for him before he had even understood what she meant. When his scouts returned 3 days later, with no sign of her, something in Draven broke, in a way that frightened even his closest generals. He marched his army toward the border villages of Alara's kingdom, certain that someone there was hiding her. Farms were searched. Storehouses were emptied. When villagers refused to speak, fires were set to barns and fences as warnings, smoke curling into the sky over homes that had done nothing but exist too close to where he believed she might be. Word of the destruction spread quickly, carried on frightened voices from village to village, until it reached Alara herself, hidden in a small woodcutter's cottage deep in the Whisperwood. She had spent those first days in something close to peace, learning to run on 4 legs through unfamiliar trees, feeling wind against fur for the first time without fear of discovery. But peace shattered the moment she heard what Draven had done in his search for her. Villages burning, families frightened from their homes, people who had never wronged anyone, suffering because a king could not accept that she had chosen to run. She could have stayed hidden. She could have told herself that his cruelty was his own doing, not her responsibility. But every column of smoke she pictured rising over her homeland felt like something she had lit herself, simply by disappearing. On the 4th night, Ilara returned. She did not sneak back into the kingdom under cover of darkness. She walked openly into Draven's war camp at the edge of the scorched village of Thorn Hollow, wearing a plain traveling cloak instead of silk, carrying nothing but a white cloth tied to a branch as a symbol of peace. Soldiers surrounded her within moments, weapons raised, until word reached Draven that the woman he had been hunting across the kingdom had simply walked into his camp and asked to see him. When he emerged from his tent, the sight of her stole every furious word he had prepared. She looked tired. Her hair was tangled with leaves, her boots caked in mud, her face pale from days of hiding, but her eyes held none of the fear he expected. Instead, they held something sharper: anger. "You are burning my people's homes to find one woman who did not want to marry you," she said, her voice steady despite the soldiers surrounding her. "So here I am. Stop hurting them." For a long moment, Draven said nothing. The rage that had fueled him for 4 days seemed to drain out of him all at once, replaced by something far heavier: shame. He ordered his soldiers to lower their weapons. He ordered the fires in the nearby fields to be put out. And then, in front of his own generals, in front of the villagers watching from broken doorways, the Alpha King of the Northern Realms did something none of them had ever seen him do. And he knelt. "I let my fear become cruelty," he said quietly, only for her to hear at first, though his voice carried further than he intended. "I told myself I was searching for a bride who betrayed an alliance, but the truth is, the moment I saw what you truly were, I felt something I did not know how to carry. I was not chasing a broken promise, I was chasing fear, and I let that fear burn what did not deserve to burn." Ilara studied him for a long moment, unmoving. Trust was not something she could hand back to him, simply because he had knelt in the mud and spoken softly. Words were easy for kings, actions were not. "If you want forgiveness," she said finally, "you will not get it from me first." You will earn it from them. She gestured to the villagers standing in the wreckage of their homes. To the surprise of everyone watching, Draven agreed. Over the following weeks, the Alpha King who had once burned villages in his fury became the same man who rebuilt them with his own hands. He ordered wagons of grain and lumber sent to every home his soldiers had damaged. He personally oversaw the rebuilding of barns and fences, working alongside farmers who had every reason to hate him, and slowly, carefully, began to earn something closer to respect. Elara stayed nearby during this time, not as his bride, not as his prisoner, but as a woman, watching closely to see whether the man before her was capable of change or simply skilled at performing it. She saw him carry water to elderly villagers who could not walk far. She saw him apologize, plainly and without excuses, to families who had lost animals and shelter because of his anger. She saw him refuse the comforts of his royal tent, choosing instead to sleep among the soldiers helping to rebuild, as though punishing himself with the same discomfort he had caused others. Slowly, something shifted between them. Not the forced bond of a political marriage, and not the overwhelming pull of fate that had once frightened her, but something quieter, understanding. Draven no longer looked at her as a prize to be claimed or a mate to be owned. He began asking what she wanted, rather than assuming he already knew. He listened when she spoke of her mother, of the fear she had carried since childhood about her true nature, of the years spent hiding herself to protect a crown that had never truly protected her in return. In turn, Elara began to see the difference between the king who had marched an army in blind fury and the man kneeling in the mud, willing to rebuild what his fear had destroyed. Months later, when the villages stood whole again, roofs repaired, fields replanted, trust slowly rebuilt one conversation at a time, Draven asked her a question he had never thought to ask before their first wedding. He asked if she wanted to marry him. Not commanded, not assumed, asked. Elara did not answer immediately. She walked the rebuilt streets of Thornhollow first, speaking with the families who had once feared the sight of Draven's banners, watching how they greeted him now with cautious warmth instead of dread. She thought about the wolf inside her, no longer hidden beneath a collar, running freely through the whisperwood whenever she pleased. She thought about the vows she had once fled from, vows that would have bound her to a stranger's ownership. This time, when she agreed, it was not to save a kingdom, and it was not to escape a war. It was because she chose him, freely, with open eyes, knowing exactly who he had been and who he was working to become. Their second wedding was nothing like the first. There was no grand cathedral, no 1,000 silent guests, no collar hidden beneath silk. It took place in the rebuilt village square of Thornhollow, surrounded by the very people who had once suffered because of Draven's fear, now standing as witnesses to how far he had come. Elara wore a simple dress the color of autumn leaves, her wolf eyes bright and unhidden beneath the afternoon sun. When the priest asked if she would bind herself to Draven Ashmore, she did not think of cages or crowns. She thought of freedom, chosen rather than stolen, and she said yes.